In this interview, we discussed the documentary highlighting the artists of the Syrian Revolution, The Story Won't Die by David Henry Gerson, and afterwards we hear from him and his team for a special Q&A following the New York City premiere.
Luckily, I'm an artist, so I have space to use my memories.
Tripoli, waiting for the ship, trip to Turkey, swag, whatever.
That was amazing. It was shocking for them to see Syrian refugees. They are like rock stars coming from the sea.
I saw the effects of war on me when I started doing music and art.
I couldn't resist that temptation to scream against the whole history of Syria, against the whole establishment that is called Syria.
Art can talk about politics, but politics can't ever talk about art.
It became like a wave of people leaving.
12 million out of the country, and the regime is still there.
Through the people that I have known.
I'm proud of what we did, this amazing movement that rose out of nothing.
Straight in my new mind's eye.
All those thoughts, it will never arrive to my brain if I didn't had that journey.
Well, David, the man behind The Story Won't Die, thank you so much for joining us. An incredibly powerful documentary about Syrian refugees, in particular the ones that you highlighted who are making a positive impact. Why was this the story to tell, and why is this the right time to put it out?
I don't know. I mean, my family has been refugees for generations. On the border of Ukraine and Poland is sort of where my father's side of the family comes from, and they've gone back and forth. My father was born a refugee. And seeing that the Syrian Revolution and the Syrian Civil War afterwards was not the revolution, but the Syrian Civil War was the largest displacement of people since World War II. Just really got me paying attention. And I just felt I had to do something. And, when you initially think of refugees, maybe you think of like a UNICEF ad of a mother with a starving child in her arms. And of course, that's a true story, but there's many other faces of the refugee experience. And so this film became kind of my way of, in a way, coming to understand what my father's experience was like, and coming to really understand what is the Syrian experience like. And beyond that, what is the artistic process in looking at some sort of trauma, horror, war like what we've seen in Syria? And so who are the Picassos or the Bob Dylans coming out of Syria, making music, making art that really gives voice to the trauma that has happened there over the last decade.
Definitely. And how did you narrow it down to those select few artists?
We started just by doing like a large search, and then it came down to whose work we really liked initially and sort of what one person would lead to another. We brought on a co-producer, Abdulaziz Al-Hamza, who was in Matthew Heinemann's film City of Ghosts. And while I was very much interested initially in what does it mean to process war, he was also telling me about what does it mean to protest war. And he introduced us to people like Abu Hajar, the rapper, whose lyrics got him imprisoned and tortured by Assad. Diala Brisley, who's an animator and illustrator, who we did a talk with Shepard Fairey, the artist and activist, when we premiered at Hot Docs. And Shepard sort of compared her work to being like a Trojan horse. Her work is very playful and childlike, and yet that's sort of the entrance point. But once you get into the work, you realize, she's sharing the horrors of war with the world in a way that maybe people turn off and stop paying attention at a certain point. And hopefully these kinds of artworks can really reanimate people and reawaken people to what's going on.
You're no stranger to filmmaking and tackling some really tough and heartbreaking topics, but was there anything that personally surprised you that you learned in the process of making this?
I think I, as an American, really came to appreciate freedom of expression. And we talk about it in the US, and it's in the Constitution, and but we don't. It's hard to appreciate it until you meet someone who's been tortured for a lyric like "the driver of this car is weird." Something as seemingly inane as that, or liking a music video or a drawing on Facebook that can get you tortured, arrested. To me, that was a real eye opener. And certainly you can read about some of these things, but really speaking about it in depth with some of the people in the film really got me to appreciate freedom of expression and realize how important it is and how important it is to safeguard it.
What do you hope this film does in terms of its positive impact? Obviously, it's shining a light on this major crisis. But I mean, you mentioned Ukraine and your family and everything, and it's great that these days it seems like a lot of Ukrainian refugees are going to have the resources available to them. But unfortunately, that hasn't always been the case with Syrian refugees or refugees in general from the Middle East or Haiti, Mexico. The list goes on and on. So what do you hope this documentary accomplishes, not just spreading awareness, but also reminding people, hey, these guys are human too?
I think that for sure. I think there's kind of two elements here. One is, I started making this during a previous administration in the United States, and there's been a lot of politicians around the world and rhetoric against refugees, against immigrants from around the world. And I think the first step is to say, okay, wait a minute, who are these people? If a building is bombed, inside of that building are going to live film critics, are going to live artists, are going to live, politicians, the full spectrum of human life. And meeting some of these people that have been through these horrific experiences, my hope is by introducing some of these people to Western audiences, that when we think about closing the door, so to speak, we first can see the face of who's on the other side of that door and realize that we too, anyone could be put in this situation. Anyone can become a refugee at any time, really, whether we like to think so or not. And I think if we can realize the shared humanity and understand who these people are, we may be in a better position if we're ever put in that same situation. So that's one, is really, on a policy level, on a humanity level, realizing this, shared experience we all might have and how people have processed it. The other is for anyone who's been through this sort of experience, to be given hope, to be given inspiration by these artists who have not shied away, who have really done the very difficult, in some cases impossible work of looking into the darkness that they have come from. That is that hope, that sense that one can make something out of their horrific experiences, to me is personally one of the most inspiring things I've learned from the people in this film, and I hope audiences around the world will feel the same.
The resilience that was shown throughout the film, definitely awe-inspiring. But of course, you've mentioned the political situation and everything, and the rapper being jailed and tortured. I mean, was there anything that you had to, I don't know if leave out of the documentary is the right phrasing, but was there like a line you had to walk to be careful and sensitive to all the parties, since some of them are technically still in danger?
Absolutely. I think first off, we really try to avoid politics as much as possible. It's really much more about the human processing of war. And certainly any personal details or anyone who's still back in Syria, we really had to be careful in that regard, to make sure that everyone felt safe. I don't want to make a movie and put anyone in danger. So that stayed out. And it's only 83 minutes. So there's a vast war that happened over 10 years and a lot of very important, very fascinating and nuanced information. And I think there are many other films that are really brilliant documentaries about Syria that maybe tell you more about the nuances of what's happening in Syria still today, and what has happened over the last 10 years. This film is more of a step back, maybe, about how to process and what that journey looks like, over time, from a broader perspective. So there are a lot of details that got omitted.
The final product is absolutely fantastic, but I would imagine with a film of this undertaking, took a whole lot. What was the most challenging aspect of making it?
I think making a sort of smaller independent film like this takes a huge amount of endurance. And just, I feel that, staying, believing in the work that you're doing, if anyone is trying to make a film like this, and just keeping that endurance to make sure that you get it through and make sure you get it to audiences. I feel that's the ultimate responsibility of a filmmaker. I mean, that I think was one of the biggest challenges, just making sure that we can keep on pushing. And, we edited it throughout COVID and started at film festivals that were online. And, you hit roadblocks along the way, and you have to believe as a filmmaker that what you're doing has a purpose and should be out there in the world. If you didn't believe that, you would never go through the years that it takes to make a movie. So I think that was probably the biggest roadblock.
Of course, people could check it out June 21st on all major platforms for video on demand, including Apple, Amazon Prime Video, Vimeo, and on World Refugee Day of all days, which I'm assuming was deliberate, right?
Not an accident.
And we want to get you out here on a positive note. You're an accomplished filmmaker, award-winning. This documentary itself has been critically acclaimed for good reason. For any young aspiring filmmakers watching or listening to this, especially those that want to work with this kind of serious subject matter and tell it in a responsible way, what's the best piece of advice you give them?
I think you have to take care of yourself when dealing with these sort of subjects. They're very hard. And it may be that you don't realize that. My previous film dealt with World War II, and I ended up my body collapsed after the shoot. I think you have to realize that you're walking into very delicate territory, and both to have utmost respect for the people whose story you're telling, but also respect for yourself along the way to make sure you're treating the storytelling holistically. Whatever that means.
Yeah, you mentioned your body shutting down. So when you're dealing with stories that have a lot of trauma, I mean, you're kind of experiencing that second, third hand. Like, what steps have you taken to kind of stay mentally clear and focused and not let that overwhelm you? Because it's understandably, very sad subject.
Of the artists in this film, and I one of my favorite lines in the film is one of the artists says, "We're tired of being lab rats for documentaries." Because they've been in a lot of, BBC and CNN interviews and in other documentaries. There's sort of a humor in the film. One of the artists jokes and says, this is what a refugee artist looks like walking down the street. There's a humor in those who talk about their own trauma. And I feel in making a story like this, you have to have a certain amount of humor in the same kind of way, because otherwise it's overwhelming. It's just too difficult. So I think taking the time to enjoy yourself, enjoy your company, and be able to have a sense of humor about your work is very important.
And in one line or less, why should people watch The Story Won't Die?
To meet some inspiring, brilliant creatives who are looking at the worst war we've seen as far as duration at this point since World War II.
The Story Won't Die is a documentary that chronicles the lives of 9 Syrian artists who are using their art to speak up against the Assad regime, but also now to process their trauma of war and having to now redefine their collective identity, their artistic identities, and to integrate into a life away from home. So with that said, I'll jump right into my first question. This is a question for all of you. When did you know you had to make this film?
I'll start us off. I made a short film called All These Voices. That was my thesis film from film school. And that was a film about artists really after World War II giving voice to the Second World War. And that won the Student Academy Award in 2016, and there was a short documentary about Lesbos and about the Syrian refugee crisis. And I just felt my father was born a refugee after World War II in Uzbekistan, and I just felt I had grown up being told stories of exile and never forget certain stories of exile. And so when I saw that this was the worst since World War II, it just felt like I'd have to do something. And then fortunately I met Odessa.
I guess I was at a sort of transitional moment in my life, and a friend of mine who's an artist called me up one day and said that she was in contact with a Syrian refugee who is in Azraq camp, and she'd gotten a bunch of these messages from artists, and she was coming to New York to write the messages around New York. And I just said, I want to document it, and that was the first documentary that I ever made. And when I was finishing that and sort of fascinated by these conversations that I was having with these artists that were stuck in Azraq camp on the border of Syria and Jordan, I met David, and we sort of felt like it was synchronistic, and tried to expand the project, which became that.
And 4 years later, here we are.
And thankfully we met Aziz, because he really kind of cast the film and help us shape what we were looking for out of our subjects.
Yeah, I think like they said everything. So I came across like in the I would say like in the middle of the process, and it's like as I always say, like I'm not in the film industry. I care less about it. So, but when I heard like the story is involving Syrian artists, I needed to make sure that the story is like well known, put out. So because I've come across so many reports and documentaries were made about Syria, and most of them they just focus on the fact that there are like Syrian refugees in the story. But all those like people, like the artists, they have like a message. As you've seen like in the documentary, all those people are like politically involved, and that was like important for me to show to everyone, because so many people like what they would call like in the West or like white people would prefer not to be politically involved, which is something I dislike. So for me, I needed to make sure that those people have their political views and like messages, what they've been through and their struggle that they've been like expressing through art well shown to everyone.
And in that same vein, the film opens with Alan Gerson's quote, "It is not what you think about a person when they're gone, it is what you create inspired by them." And so, what are some what actions do you hope audience members are inspired to take after watching The Story Won't Die? What audiences do you hope that this film is watched by, and what is an immediate action item that audience members here today can take after leaving this theater?
Yeah, I mean, the quote was my father's quote, and weirdly, I just realized his birthday is June 19th. Mm-hmm. And he was dying as we were editing the film, and I was leaving to go to California, and I said, "Dad, I'll be thinking about you." And he looked me in the eyes and said, "It's not what you think about a person when they're gone, it's what you create inspired by them." And so obviously there's some very personal aspects for me of making this movie, and sort of my relationship with my father, and kind of coming to understand his origins as a displaced person growing up. And I think though that message of to create, for me, is why I'm grateful for having made this movie. These are people in this film who very easily could just say, "I don't want to look to the darkness that I've come from." These are people who actively say, "I'm willing to look into that darkness," and from that to create, and not to see myself as a victim, but to build from the experiences that life has given me. And for me, that's, I can't really think of something more personally inspiring to me. So I think as far as action items, go to www.thestorywon'tdie.com, where you can click on the artists tab, and you can follow all of the artists in the film. You can go to their Bandcamp, their SoundCloud, you can go to their concerts, you can go to their exhibitions, support these artists, support artists like them who are doing this kind of difficult work. Go to @thestorywon'tdie on Instagram and celebrate them. And celebrate this kind of work. I think that's the most direct action item.
I mean, I would have to add to that, though, that I think the core of why I make any film in my life is to try and make the world even smaller in a way that we can see and feel and connect to people that we wouldn't otherwise connect with, you know? Mm-hmm. I mean, the Iraq War was something that affected me very deeply, the way that we could go and just bomb another country like that and go to war, and obviously it continues on. Ukraine we're dealing with currently, but I think that films like this and every film that I make, I hope it just helps everyone see someone that they wouldn't necessarily feel anything about, or like a Syrian refugee was something that was so, I don't know, just there were a lot of cliches about what a Syrian refugee is, or when you saw them on the street, especially in Europe, we weren't as affected by it here, and I wanted to humanize what this is, and I think that the action items is in your own life, do that with, that's what we all have to do in today's world, so that's, I think, the for me, yeah.
Aziz?
I would say like everything they said. I like mainly like to tell your friends. So the documentary would be playing like this week, like 5 times a day, like here. So Cinema Village. So it's like just important like spread the word. It's like the main reason why I got involved is always to let people understand what's going on. So like in such conflict, so many people they get lost, and for them they would always say that, oh, okay, it's like a 10-year conflict or whatsoever. It's hard for us to understand. Documentaries has made things way easier for people to sit for like an hour, 90 minutes and watch what's happening and having an idea about what's happening. So it's all about awareness for me, just like spread the word, tell your friends, and most importantly that those people are like human like everyone else. So some like media publications, outlets have kind of like put them in a different way. There were like so many talks about like refugees, yes or no, whatever, as we were playing a game. So I just like to shed like a different aspect about those people and their life, that they're like normal people, and even like the way how Anas was saying like, hey, I'm a refugee, I'm walking down the street. So it's like the way how Mia was like, oh my god, you're a refugee, as they're like a Pokemon or something. So it's just like a different way to let people know, like, no, like, all things that you might have heard of like in media or other places completely different. So that's like one of the main reasons. Plus like the most important thing for me as someone is like the political stand in everything. So many people they try to stay in the middle and not take a side about like everything happening, and in such situation this show like the creator of like the main problem, why there are like refugee crisis, where people are like fleeing their countries. So that was also like the number one thing that I was like pushing to show for everyone.
I would add to that also, it's going to be released digitally on, so Monday is World Refugee Day, whatever that, but the next day it'll be released around the world on iTunes, Amazon.
Floor for questions from the audience. Let me ask you about the title of the documentary, The Story Won't Die, how you came to name the documentary, and in fact, how it relates to Abu Hajar's verses.
I should mention too, like my initial interest in this movie was how can we process war? How can art be used to process the horrors of war? And when we met Aziz, he really aptly pointed out art is also used to protest war. And through Aziz, we met Abu Hajar, the rapper in the film, who says hello and wishes he were here right now. And we had a very phony first title of this movie. Phoenix, it was called initially. And we saw in Abu Hajar's lyrics of his first song, he says, you saw it there, that Madeline's dead, but the story won't die. And I think that to me just, we were sifting through titles and we're like, oh, that's it, so. And I think that goes back to the thing about creating and when politicians are gone, hopefully these artworks live on. And for me, that's the most hopeful thing, the reason to create.
This was so powerful and eye-opening and educational. I just wanted to ask, what was the hardest part about making this, and were all of the artists excited to do it, or were some of them a little more reluctant for personal or other reasons? What was your experience kind of going through it?
The question was what was some of the challenges of making the film, with really working with some of the artists in the film, and I, one of my favorite lines in the film is we're tired of being lab rats for documentaries. many of them have done a lot of documentaries and have been with a lot of journalists on BBC and CNN and been celebrated and talked about as refugee artists. And a lot of them were very reluctant to be in a movie about quote-unquote refugee artists. We don't even really use the word refugee in talking about the film in general, because some of them haven't even applied for refugee status. So certainly one of the biggest obstacles was just, I mean, my goal was to like make this an intimate hangout with some friends, and fortunately we found like what I feel are some of the coolest people out there. And so, of course, there are many other great artists out there. But, you know, this was sort of a small sample of very totally different mindsets, from religious to not religious, from wealthy to poor. And I think the challenge also was just fighting against cliches, fighting against being lab rats for documentaries. And you know, ultimately, this is a film about storytellers. This is a film about people who are struggling to find a way to tell their story in their various mediums. And so balancing that and working with them to craft the story, I think that was just the hardest part of it.
I would also add that the other hardest part, I think, was when we first started it, because our first shoot was on Lesbos in Moria refugee camp, and it's considered hell on earth by like many news outlets, and just being thrown into the conditions that these like people like you and me are stuck in for months and months, and watching them go through the process of every month going and getting a red stamp on their piece of paper, which means they can't go on, and watching their journey over 2 years, like even kids that didn't end up in the film, but just staying in touch with them and, you know, falling through the cracks and not getting refugee or asylum status, and understanding the background that they're coming from, and having to work illegal jobs at almost like slave labor wages, and sleeping on the streets. And it's been absolutely heartbreaking. I think following all the kids and the people that I met through finding like our subjects, like I said, there's a bunch who didn't end up in the film who've had incredibly challenging journeys since meeting them. I think that's been very hard.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi. Well, thank you, first of all, for such a beautiful film. Before my question, the film reminds the normalcy of life, like the quest for having a normal life, making work being the most important thing, and for people's sanity, well, from whatever, despite whatever they go through. And the film definitely puts that forward as the message that you guys been telling, like this is the artists and their lives. And I fall into sometimes myself to going into the stereotypes, thinking like the word refugee, and everything I've read, everything that I've been exposed to, I have a certain thing that I have to break, that I have to keep on breaking. And the film definitely is like a hammer. Yes, that breaks. It breaks. And I'm curious if the film brought some of these artists together, or they knew each other before.
Both.
A bit of both.
Yeah.
I mean, when we first met Abu Hajar, he and Anas were just starting a collaboration, so we really tracked that collaboration as they were going on. I think he knew Medhat. But certainly we said,
not as well. Like we were like,
we said this is a beautiful field at Tempelhof, and it's now springtime and golden light, and let's go, talk about your music video. That so there were certain mild ways that we assisted.
They all kind of knew of each other than Shadow, the one guy who's in refuge in the Netherlands, the breakdancer. Breakdancer. He didn't know any of them. We met in Moria, at the refugee camp in Greece, and sort of followed him from there.
Yeah, I think that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
What story resonates most with you out of all that you're going to do, or met, whether they're
The question was which story for each of us from the film and who we met resonates the most.
I mean, I love Anas. I'd probably make a whole movie about Anas because he's such a character. I wanted to make a whole movie about Anas, but he was like, no, I don't want to be in your documentary. I was like, please. He was like, no. But yeah, he's hilarious. And I keep in touch, obviously. I see him every time I'm in Berlin. Comes in, hangs out on my current sets or whatever it is. Great guy.
But is there something about his story that resonated with you?
Yeah, just that I think that the way that he like looks at it all, the way that he, you know, what he, like if you look at his Instagram, I think that the way that he has turned like his journey into his art, I find the absolute coolest. He pulls just different aspects, mixing it with the modern world and the past and his pain. I find his work to be the most inspiring, and I would encourage all of you to dig through his Instagram. He's unfortunately taken a lot of it down, but I've never seen like visual art like this on like a social media platform. It's just brilliant, every little drop, and then he goes and he takes it off because he's like, that was stupid, because he overthinks it. And
yeah, as he says, as he welcomes us to his room, you know, here's where I overthink.
Like and his music is so good. So when I heard his music, I was like, here's someone who's so talented, you know, and that is like truly when you see like the journey they've come from, what the challenges they're facing, but the talent they have, like it's so frustrating. You just wanna. He'd love to come to the States, can't, you know?
I think for me, one of the, you know, I grew up being told all these stories about like surviving survival, and even having been through the worst possible circumstances, how still you would fight with your family or still have to, you know, stupid little small human things. And amongst those was losing faith in God. And hating God and being angry at God. And there's a story of Medhat's that really reminded me of my grandfather, where he says that he was, you know, sleeping on the side of the road in Thessaloniki, and part of his year's journey from Syria to Berlin, and he said, no, you know, God is dead. It's done. I am my own God going forward. That I will not be a victim, that I will take these circumstances and make myself into the greatest artist I can be. I think for me that was really like one of the most moving and inspiring moments in the film.
Okay, the thing is like I kind of know all of them besides Shadow.
Oh,
so
but you have to pick one.
Yeah, I would pick. I would say Shadow because it's like the only one that I didn't know at all.
I looked at
Okay. So he's like the only one that I didn't know at all, and I remember I was like in Amsterdam and like I contacted him, and he's so young. Like at the time he was like 18, 19. He's so young. So there was like an age gap. So I went out with him. And he started like dancing in the middle of the street, and the crowd that he was able to bring in like 2 minutes, it was crazy. It was insane for like an 18 years old, just like dancing in the middle of Amsterdam and like the crowd. And then when I was talking with him, like in my mind I was like looking at this 18 years old like boy dancing in the middle of Amsterdam. Everyone's looking at him, cheering him up, and then we went like to eat, and he started talking, and he was talking as like a 50 years old guy. So that's like the difference that you can tell, like what he's been through, like his family situation. So, and like I've come across like so many like kids like 17, 18, like when I go like to give talks, especially in schools, they're like in two different spaces. Like people they are like us, like Snapchat, Instagram, cookies, TikTok, like whatever. And for him, like he can give you like a political lecture for like 1 hour, like 3 minutes later he's dancing in the middle of the street like a baby. So for me that was like the only like fascinating character person that I've kind of like was so excited to meet and to know. The others are like all great, all amazing. I kind of know all of them. Like we did hang out, we traveled, whatever. So I'm not gonna name them, so you know them. But I would say like Shadow, it was like the outstanding like character in the entire document for me.
Yes.
I have one. It's short. I was wondering, why only 9 or why as many as 9? Is there a reason for the number of artists?
Yes, it's a very Holy Spirit. No. Yeah. There were other artists we'd interviewed. The question was why this many artists? It just was the way it worked out. We had interviewed several other people, and it was just, even 8, 9. It's just hard to balance. But no, there wasn't a real, as far as I know, secret reason to the number.
Any last questions before we wrap up?
Can I just say something? Okay, I come from Greece, and the story of Moria was really important to us there. In the first few years, people were very receptive and taking care of the refugees. They were positive. Towards the end, like 2 years ago, it was, why have you come here? We didn't integrate you. Go back. It wasn't nice, and it's still not nice. I have to say that because I have been involved with refugees for like 20, 21 years, back in starting from Crete, when the first ships started, boats started coming. This was the first time that I ever saw something and that I did not cry, which means a lot about this film, because it brings light and a positive perspective, and it definitely breaks stereotypes. So thank you very much for this feeling that you brought to me. Thank you.
This is sort of the end of a year of us traveling the world with this movie. And I just want to personally say thank you all for coming here tonight. And that, yes.
I want to say something.
Yeah.
This is my story, like the story on the screen. I'm Syrian on asylum in the United States, and I'm part of the Syrian revolution. I usually come to Syrian refugee movies irritated, because there is a white director who thinks we should be grateful, and then the film is racist. And I can't say anything because we should be grateful he is covering Syria or she is covering Syria. I'm not talking about simple as water, for example. So here I came and I'm like, I'm gonna like it or I'm gonna kill Aziz later. That's gonna be I really enjoyed every aspect of it. The political agency of us that usually wanna wipe. People wanna make us like, suddenly something happened to us and we became in the US. We became in Europe and we should be happy about it. So in every aspect, even in showing asylum as heavy and as the country's policies toward refugees as something that is not to be celebrated. So in every aspect of it, I was really glad, and I was like, what do I love this scene? Yes. So thank you so much for that, because it means a lot to sit here and watch it. And I wonder why Abu Hajar or Anas did not come to the screening, and if the reason is the ban, the American visa, I hope you mention it in screenings over and over, because sometimes people think because those are artists, we can bring them here like this, and they don't know that, yeah, they're gonna sit in the airport for 6 hours of security screening, even if they are artists or whatever.
You can't even get Anas a visa.
Yeah, so I think this is like, you didn't get him a visa?
No, we wouldn't be able to, no.
Yes.
Abu Hajar has a visa.
He's got his pass. He just became a German citizen.
Oh yeah, he's a German citizen.
Last December. So
he could have traveled, but he's come to lots. So he was like.
And he was performing in a huge festival last weekend, and it was a little too much. But thank you.
But no, I don't think we would have been able to get any of them a visa, because it's so difficult, you know?
Yeah.
So difficult.
I know. Can I sit on class?
Yes. This is, yeah.
Well, as David's mother. I've seen this several times, and I was really struck tonight how, with all that we've all been through and our sympathies, I hope, with Ukraine, that this movie is really something that will live on. It it says the problems of refugees and of people that have gone through war, and that it's a human problem. And I think we can all, it seems, I identified with it much more than before. And, you know, I'm just so glad that you did it.
It's all thanks, Tim. So I just want to take a selfie of all of us together here. Come on now, Odessa, over here real quick. Aziz, everyone get in there. We have a nice full crowd. Thank you, everybody. 3, 2, 1. Heck yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.